Hello, everyone. This is Monica Pretz from Tennessee Environmental Council, and I do see people starting to join up to this webinar live stream about native bees. So I will just first start to introduce everyone in this presentation. So my name is Monica Pretz from Tennessee Environmental Council, and I am the pollinator program leader. And today we have the pleasure to have Dianne Arwin, the Xerces Society Ambassador, with us, who will have a wonderful presentation about native bees of North America. We will also have this call Gwendolyn Blanton, the pollinator program manager, and Brandy Previtt, our communication director. They will help this presentation with answering the questions during the presentation that comes up. And to explain how the webinar will work, I will start with a short presentation about the Generate Some Buzz program. I do hope that we have a lot of new people who has recently joined our program. So I will explain a little bit about our program, what we do, how we do it. And then we will move on to Dianne's beautiful presentation about native bees. If you have any questions during the presentation, please write your question into the Q&A field. If it is about the Generate Some Buzz program, then Brandy will probably answer your questions during the presentation. And if it is about native bees, then we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So I will start very quickly with my presentation, opening it. Okay, here we go. Oh, sorry, we just have to go back to the very beginning. So, native bees, the unsung heroes of pollination. This presentation is by Tennessee Environmental Council and Xerces Society. We are super proud and happy to have Dianne with us today, joining us. I just want to say a few words about Tennessee Environmental Council for those people who has recently joined and may not know. So Tennessee Environmental Council is a non-profit organization founded in the 1970s. Our mission is helping people and communities improving our environment. Our vision is thriving habitats, circular economy, and climate balance in Tennessee. We have several wonderful programs, not just a pollinator program, but we have wonderful programs about planting trees, creek cleanups, recycling roundups, zero waste living, pollinator programs, and also riverbank stabilization. So please check out our website to learn more. But of course, this presentation is about our pollinator program, the Generate Some Buzz program. So this program was created to attract, feed, and protect pollinator species in Tennessee, but all over North America. We are here to restore and create new pollinator habitats, and we are engaging with Tennesseans and forming vibrant communities with them. And we would love to educate people about pollinators and why they are so extremely important. So unfortunately, we all hear, read, and notice that pollinators are declining. And there are several reasons for that. Number one reason is habitat loss, urbanization, and the lawns that we create. Unfortunately, we love our lawns. We love them short and green, and that means they are basically ecological deserts for pollinators. The other reason that drives pollinator number decline is the insecticides and herbicides and fertilizer that we use in our agriculture and also in our gardens. So I always ask anyone to try to avoid them. The number of chemicals in our environment is unfortunately increasing without us often even realizing. The Xerces Society newsletter stated a few weeks ago that if you buy seeds, for example, in the spring, you can see on the top of the slide seeds, those are coated with insecticides and herbicides. And unfortunately, without noticing, those seeds are spreading toxins into our environment. A single corn seed can kill, covered with these pesticides, it can kill 80,000 bees. So that is a very unfortunate second reason. And of course, monoculture agriculture is the third reason. And if you look at the bottom side, on the right-hand side, the cornfield that produce very little food and habitat for pollinators. But even if you think of an apricot orchard or an almond orchard, it's beautiful in the spring. It provides a lot of food for pollinators, maybe in March and April. But then there is no food on those fields in May, June, July, August, September, October, November, all the year. So pollinators lose their habitat and they die. But of course, there are solutions, and we are here to invite you to join us and create the solutions. Number one solution is to have pollinator habitats, high diversity of native wildflowers, create urban and suburban gardens with native plants, planting trees and shrubs as well for pollinators. And of course, regenerative agriculture, diversity of fruit trees, cover crops, all kind of crops. Would create habitat for pollinator and food source throughout the whole year. Now, I want to talk about native and keystone plants a little bit because our program focuses on planting native plants. So we like native plants and we support everyone who wants to plant more native plants because they are highly adapted to the environment and to the ecoregions. They evolve together with native wildlife. I also would like to mention keystone plants. Keystone plants are the ones that are unique for the local food web within the ecoregion, and they are essential for insects and birds and wildlife species. To explain it a little bit more, I would like to let you know about the host plant specialization. So about 90% of herbivorous insects are host specialists, are specializing on plants. And the reason for that is plants during evolution has developed defenses against herbivores. So that means they develop toxins. Like, for example, on the left-hand side, you can see a common milkweed plant. Common milkweed, the leaves contains cardiac glyphosate, and that's a toxin that is is bad for humans and horses and cattle. But the monarch butterfly, the beautiful orange monarch butterfly, its caterpillars can eat this cardiac glyphosate and the leaves. So insects have co-evolved with native plants and adapted to these specific defenses. And that means that actually the caterpillar of monarch butterfly not only eat this, but this is the only thing it can eat. So we need to plant native plants to provide food source for them. So I would like to enjoy every one of you, if you haven't registered yet, to register and join Tennessee Environmental Council Generate Some Buzz program. We are looking forward to have a new 800 participants of the program by July. So that could be you. So please join, check out our website. If you register, you can order native seeds from Tennessee Environmental Council. This is the 4 seed mixes that you can find: the Southern Pollinator Conservation Seed Mix, the Southern Butterfly and Hummingbird Seed Mix, the Honeybee Mix, and the Southern Monarch Habitat Mix. So a few words about how, when you join the program, how you create a garden. You can create your own garden in your backyard or in your front yard. Number one is to design the size and shape of the garden. Then you remove the sod to remove all invasive grass roots. And then you add the compost and the soil. Step 2 is to create. You will spread the native seeds that you ordered from us. And then you wait and monitor germination. Some of the seeds need temperature above 68 to 70 degrees to start to germinate, and germination might take 15 to 30 or even more days. And you need to monitor your garden and make sure to remove the returning invasive species. And then step 3 is you enjoy, you sit back and watch pollinators, finding the new habitat, food source, mating, resting, and hibernation site. Now, when you establish a garden, we usually say it takes about 3 to 5 years for the garden to mature. And I quickly want to explain that the first root is mostly about root development. For first year is mostly about root development. The wildflower seeds will start to grow their roots and go deeper in the soil. And the earlier you start the garden, you have a better chance that in the dry, hot summer days, the plants will flower very quickly. Second year is about foliage growth, more flower will appear, and really the third to fourth and fifth year is when your garden mature and spreads through their seeds and develop more flowers and diversity. Our gardens are habitat all year round. You can see on the left-hand side the same garden at Xerces High School with the first beautiful flowers appearing in June. And then the lower picture was taken end of November. So it's a winter garden. These gardens are habitat for a complete life cycle of insects. They are food source, resting and mating site. They are winter hibernation sites, so we do not cut these gardens back for the winter, but they are also extremely important food source for birds, nesting seasons, and migrating and overwintering birds as well. Most of the birds, 90% of the birds, feed their babies with caterpillars and insects in the springtime. So these gardens provide food not only to the insect, but for the predators, the birds as well. So we would like to ask you to join us. Let's generate some buzz together. Check out our website. And this concludes my presentation. And I will just quickly go to the presentation of Dianne's. Her amazing presentation will be how to bring back pollinators. And please listen to this wonderful presentation. Dianne is a dear friend of mine. She's a fellow Tennessean. She's so involved and devoted to invertebrates. She's ambassador of the Xerces Society. So at the end of her presentation and during, you can use the Q&A field and ask questions.
I'm Dianne Arwin, an ambassador with the Xerces Society and a certified Tennessee naturalist. I've always been interested in gardening and nature, but I'm becoming more concerned about the environment. I started reading about pollinators and I joined the Xerces Society. I attended webinars and taking classes online, and the more I learned, the more interested and fascinated I became about invertebrates. Bees, wasps, and all the animals responsible for pollination have been misunderstood. I grew up with the mother that had a can of Raid in one hand and a fly swatter in the other. Insects were something to be feared or annoyed by. I didn't understand the importance of invertebrates in the natural world and how our lives are intimately linked to their survival. There's a lot of conversation about pollinators today and their importance, and I am passionate about spreading the word about the importance of conservation of pollinators, and I hope that you will be inspired too by watching this presentation. So I would like to acknowledge the Xerces Society for this presentation. This is an amazing organization, but they don't do this work alone. They partner with other organizations and groups so they can continue their mission. Named for the now extinct Xerces blue, since 1971, the Xerces Society has worked to protect wildlife through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. Xerces blue butterfly, shown here in this picture, is the first U.S. butterfly to go extinct due to human activities. This species lived in coastal sand dunes in the Sunset District of San Francisco Peninsula in California, and it hasn't been seen since the 1940s. Okay, so what is an invertebrate? It's an animal lacking a backbone, including multiple classes of animals from insects to crustaceans. The fate of the world's insects is inseparable from our own. Our lives depend entirely on insects. So if you're new to the idea of invertebrate conservation, that might seem like an exaggerated statement. Invertebrates play crucial roles in our survival. They break down organic matter that keeps our biosphere in check, decomposing dead material, such as composting we do in our gardens, decaying trees, etc. Invertebrates keep pest populations in check. They serve as food for other animals, such as baby birds, grizzly bears, amphibians, fish, and others. They pollinate crops and wildflowers. Invertebrates count for over 95% of animal biodiversity on the planet. Only 1% of insects are considered pests. So we rely on these animals every day without being aware of their importance in our lives. So what is pollination and how does that occur? Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the male stamen of the flower to the female pistil of the flower. This pollination then fertilizes the plant, and only fertilized plants can make fruit or seeds. Without being fertilized, the plant cannot reproduce. So how does pollination occur? Flowers must rely on this transfer of pollen from different sources, such as wind, water, bees, wasps, moths, butterflies, birds, and bats. Pollinators are truly the most important animals on the planet. They are considered keystone animals. We call the bumblebee and other pollinators keystone species because they are species upon which others depend. Pollinators are vital to maintain healthy ecosystems. They are essential for plant reproduction and produce genetic diversity in the plants they pollinate. Without keystone species, the ecosystem would be dramatically different or cease to exist altogether. As an example, 85% of flowering plants require a pollinator to reproduce. Our health depends on food production from pollinators. Without bees, there would be no apples, pumpkins, strawberries, and many other fruits and vegetables. Animals also need pollinators for food, such as cattle, who consume alfalfa, and alfalfa needs a pollinator to grow. The financial importance of pollinators cannot be overestimated. Every season, pollinators deliver billions in economic value and help create jobs. From food production to employment, pollinators have a far-reaching impact on all our lives. Many species of birds and fish rely on insects for food. Insects and arthropods are almost exclusively the food of birds when rearing their young. Pollinators enable the fruit and seeds that make up a major part of the diet of many animals. As an example, Carolina chickadees rear their young on insects, and a single pair may bring 390 to 570 caterpillars to their nest each day. In the summer, grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park can eat up to 40,000 miller moths a day. There are 4 major groups of pollinators: beetles, butterflies and moths, flies, wasps, and bees. Each group are unique and fascinating, but I'm going to focus today on the bees for this presentation. Bees are the most important pollinator. Bees deliberately gather pollen to bring back to their nest for their offspring. Bees also exhibit a behavior called flower consistency, meaning that they repeatedly visit one particular plant species on any given foraging trip. On a single foraging trip, a female bee may visit hundreds of flowers, transferring pollen the entire way, fertilizing the plant so that it will produce seed or fruit. Honeybees are not typical bees. The European honeybee is the most social of all bees and live in large colonies. They behave like a superorganism with a sophisticated division of labor, communication between foraging bees, and one long-lived queen that performs all the egg laying. Honeybees are not native to the United States, but were brought to the US in the 17th century. When most people hear the word bee, they think of honeybees, but There are approximately 20,000 bee species in the world, and approximately 3,600 of those bees live in North America. Honeybees create an excess of honey and are the only bee that create a product we consume. Bumblebees produce just enough honey to keep the colony alive when the weather is bad and for the female to survive the winter. Buzz pollination or sonification is a technique used by some native bees to release pollen held by the anthers in the flower. In order to release the pollen, solitary bees are able to grab onto the flower and move their flight muscles rapidly, causing the flower and anthers to vibrate, dislodging pollen. Pollination involving vibration is called buzz pollination, and about 9% of the flowers of the world are primarily pollinated using buzz pollination. Some of the important native bees that can perform this important function are the carpenter bee, mining bee, sweat bee, and leafcutter bee. There are a number of crops that require buzz pollination, such as potatoes, cranberry, tomato, blueberry, eggplant, and kiwi. Honeybees cannot perform buzz pollination and therefore cannot pollinate these crops. Bees do not intentionally carry out pollination. It is the unintended result of a bee's travels. Pollen clings to the branched and sticky hairs of the bee's body and is rubbed off as the bee walks or flies from one blossom to the other. Honeybees and some bumblebees have a structure for carrying pollen called a pollen basket, as seen in the left photo. It is a bare patch of legs surrounded by long, stiff, curving hairs that a lump of pollen moistened with nectar is packed into. The pollen is taken back to the nest to feed their young. Most native bees lack pollen baskets, but have a pollen brush. These bees carry dry pollen. They get stuck to the feather-like bristles. The center photo of the longhorn bee has an obvious brush on its rear leg. The leafcutter bee on the right has a pollen brush on the underside of its abdomen. Native bees are gentle and not aggressive. Most native bees are solitary and make their nest in the ground. Native bees are gentle and unlikely to sting since they are not protecting a nest or a stash of honey. Only the females have a stinger and will not sting unless threatened. Social bees such as honeybees and bumblebees are likely to sting in defense of their nest, only if disturbed. The diversity of bees is truly astonishing. Here we have a photo of the largest and smallest species of bees in North America. The largest is commonly known as a valley carpenter bee and can be up to 1.25 inches long. And the smallest bee is the little lost bee. Biodiversity of bee population is critical to maintain the ecosystem function of crop pollination. They are crucial for biodiversity and health all over the world. Together with other insects, pollinators ensure the survival and diversity of food crops and medicinal plants. The typical garden in the United States has somewhere between 20 to 30 different bee species in it. Bees can also come in a range of colors, from dull black to bright metallic green or blue. They may have markings in red, orange, white, black, brown, and yellow. Some bees can even look like flies, and some flies can look like bees. It can be very difficult to know if you're looking at a bee, a fly, or a wasp. Pictured above is a metallic green sweat bee. Different species of bees have tongues of different lengths. The garden bumblebee has the longest tongue of all the bumblebees. The long tongue of this bumblebee allows it to reach nectar deep inside flowers. Some bees have short tongues and can only reach the nectar of shallow flowers. So this means that not all bees will visit the same flowers. Bumblebees need a cavity in which to build their nest. The queens are opportunists, looking for a suitable size cavity. Sometimes this is above ground, such as in a hollow tree, abandoned bird nest, rock walls, or under tussocks of grass. But they mostly nest underground. An abandoned rodent hole lined with fur is a favorite environment. Roughly 70% of native bee species nest underground. These nests resemble ant nests from above ground. Look for the nest on south-facing slopes. You can promote ground nesting sites by leaving areas undisturbed with patches of bare soil. Relatively undisturbed conditions will allow bee nests to become well established, and they may be enhanced with the addition of key native flowering plants. About 30% of our native bees nest as solitary individuals in cavities or rotted wood tunnels, usually hollow stems or the abandoned beetle bore holes found in dead trees or stumps, providing habitat needs by keeping dead trees and twigs and branches if possible. Single moms emerge, mate, locate, or dig nest, collect food for their young, and use mud, leaves, resins, oils, and even pebbles for individual cell nests. Native oaks like Tennessee black oak, white oak, pin oak, or swamp chestnut oak support pollinators throughout the year in many ways, but especially by providing winter shelter and healthy habitat. Oaks also support more than 500 pollinator species of bees. The redbud tree pictured above is considered one of the most important early spring flowers for bees. Having a variety of trees in your yard will provide habitat and food for a large variety of bees and butterflies throughout the year. Leafcutter bees cut small circular shapes into leaves of their favorite tree species. The photo on the right corner shows those small circular cuts made in redbud tree leaves. Those small pieces are taken back to the nest. They use those cut leaf fragments to construct their nest cells. Leafcutter bees are native pollinators to North America and are essential pollinators to wild plants. You can see them in our gardens here in Tennessee in late spring through summer. The pupa overwinter in their nest and emerge in the spring as adults. Leafcutters are solitary bees that are not aggressive. Another common bee found here in Middle Tennessee is the mason bee, and they are considered the most docile bee in Tennessee. They are solitary, however, they will nest near other mason bees as seen in this photo. Mason bees are also named for their habitat of using mud or other masonry products to construct their nest. Mason bees emerge from their cocoons at exactly the time when early spring flowers are opening. They are the first to build their nest for the next generation in the spring. Their brief life as adults lasts from March until around the end of June. Another common bee found in Tennessee is the carpenter bee. It makes nests by tunneling into wood, bamboo, and similar hard plant dead material. These photos show a progression of the development of the carpenter bee in one of those tunneled spaces. You can see that there are individual larvae forming in each chamber. The mother will provide a small amount of pollen called bee bread in each chamber for the developing larva. She then partitions off the chamber with a small piece of wood before going into the next chamber. She can determine the sex of each egg. Females are laid first in the nest and then the males. Female bees laid first in the nest are more protected from invaders and essential to the continuation of the next generation. Approximately 25% of bee species occurring in eastern North America are specialists to a very specific host plant. Bees rely on olfactory clues to find their host plant. They detect the volatile compounds emitted from the oily coatings of pollen grains, These olfactory clues are especially important for newly emerged adults lacking foraging experience and the ability to interpret visual cues. Above are examples of early blooming endemic plants that can be found at Cedars of Lebanon State Park. These plants are Nashville breadroot, Tennessee coneflower, and Tennessee glade cress. Why garden with native wildflowers? Native plants and trees are adapted to the local climate and soil conditions where they naturally occur. These plants require less water and do not require fertilizer. They will help with erosion and reduce air pollution. These important species provide nectar, pollen, and seed that serve as food for native butterflies, insects, birds, and other animals. Common horticultural plants do not provide the same nutritional needs for bees and often require more water or insect pest control to survive. Invasive plants outcompete native vegetation because they aren't recognized as food by much of the local wildlife, which would otherwise keep them under control. Unchecked, they grow larger and eventually choke out native plants that do provide food, nesting material, and shelter for birds, pollinators, and small animals. Many native bees are specialists and may only collect pollen from one species, genus, or family of plant. That means specialist bees have evolved a specific relationship with a few or just one plant species. These specialist bees emerge from their nest at the same time their host plant begins to flower. These two websites listed above offer a lot of information about which plants and bees have this symbiotic relationship. When thinking about plants to put in your garden this year, consider locally grown or native plants. Many local garden centers offer plants that have been treated with pesticides or insecticides. When you go to the nursery, ask if the plants have been treated with chemicals. Some chemicals are systemic, such as neonicotinoids, and can stay in the plant for months and even years. It is best to seek out native plants and organic plants if possible. Choose plants best suited for our climate and soil. They will have a better chance of surviving without the need for insecticides. Some flowers are showy and pretty, but do not provide the resources that pollinators need. Some modern varieties and cultivars have lost their ability to produce pollen and nectar. Avoid double-flowered varieties. Flowers with a lot more petals than average can be pretty, but completely or nearly useless, offering little or nothing for pollinators. Next, familiarize yourself with the Tennessee list of local invasive plants. Many invasive plants are offered regularly at local garden centers, so the customer has to be very careful. So what is a gardener to do? Well, for starters, avoid any plant advertised as vigorous, self-sowing, exotic, fast-spreading, which are code words for invasive. And although eye-catching, hardy, and seemingly helpful to butterflies and other pollinators, butterfly bush is far from beneficial. In fact, it's actually an invasive species that can impair the health of our local ecosystem. Because butterfly bush offers an abundant amount of nectar, they become extremely attractive to pollinators, distracting them from other native co-flowering species and reducing the natives' reproductive success, which eventually also harms the native plant population. Removing native trees and disturbing the ground destroys habitat and food sources for these animals. This is especially true for us here in Middle Tennessee, where we are experiencing incredible growth. Right now is the perfect time to start putting in native trees and flowers for the ones we are losing due to development. 86% of land in Tennessee is privately owned. Individual landowners making changes is extremely important. Monocultures such as lawns and invasive plants add to that loss of key plant species. Large green lawns have been the standard for many homes, but they don't offer anything in the way of habitat. All the native plants have been eliminated in favor of grass. Fortunately, pollinators do not need much to survive. We need to rethink how we landscape our lawns. So consider keeping those early blooming flowers such as clover, violets, and dandelions in your lawn. These plants are important to early emerging native bees. Those weeds you see in your lawn, such as clover, are great for bees. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Overly manicured shrubs and perfect green lawns have been the trend for a long time. There can be a balance in having a healthy lawn while supporting the ecosystem and also saving money and time. There is more acceptance with the growing movement towards the return of naturalized lawns that welcomes flowering weeds. Pesticides are commonly used in urban areas. In our communities, pesticides are often used for cosmetic reasons to maintain manicured landscapes. Pesticides come with unintended consequences. The impervious surfaces in urban areas allow pesticides to wash off and easily find their way into storm drains and waterways, and affecting the health of our watersheds. Limiting urban pesticides will make a big impact and help improve water quality. Animals are also affected by pesticides with unintended consequences. The birds in this photo are interacting with the pesticide by being on the treaty ground searching for the insects they consume. Many birds feed on the ground and consume pesticide granules since they are often mistaken for food. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, millions of wild birds are killed each year due to the aesthetic use of pesticides by homeowners. Those numbers don't include birds that perish after a period of illness after feeding on poisoned insects, rodents, and other wildlife for food. Using chemical treatments on our lawns and plants will have an impact even if they are applied according to directions. Pesticide is an umbrella term often misused as synonymous with insecticides, but it is a much broader term. The pesticides we are concerned about for pollinators is insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides. The photo shows sample jars with dead bees. During Pollinator Week 2013, some trees were treated with pesticide in a parking lot to control aphids. The pesticide got through the sap and into the flowers, killing approximately 50,000 bumblebees over the period of 2 weeks. The pesticide was applied legally and according to directions. This is an example of unintended consequences. Underlies that pesticides should be avoided if at all possible. There's a lot to know about these chemicals. Xerces has other webinars specifically about pesticides on their YouTube channel from experts in the field. They give very detailed information about how these chemicals work and the effects they have on pollinators. Remember, only 1% of insects are considered pests. So if you must use pesticides, make sure you read the instructions thoroughly and only use them as directed. Think about alternatives to pesticides. There are many helpful insects that may be already in your yard, such as praying mantis, ladybugs, spiders, wasps, and birds that will help keep your garden in check from pests. Pesticides often kill the good insects along with the insects that are pests. We've gone over a lot of information in this webinar, but remember, the best conservation will support the entire life cycle. You can do that by first securing some nest sites. Second, provide flowers for foraging throughout the season. And third, strive for a pesticide-free environment. Your involvement will make a difference. Think about joining the growing number of people choosing not to mow in the month of May. This will help the first emerging pollinators find the necessary food sources. Early blooming wildflowers are important for their survival. It's spring now, but it isn't too early to mention that next fall, when you think about tidying up your yard, that one of the most valuable things you can do to support pollinators and other invertebrates is to provide them with winter cover they need. Many butterflies and moths overwinter in leaf litter as eggs, caterpillars, chrysalis, or adults. There's more information on the Xerces website from Justin Wheeler's blog called Leave the Leaves. Join the Tennessee Environmental Council Generate Some Buzz program and start your own pollinator garden. You'll have fun watching all the life a small garden can bring, and a little will go a long way in conservation. If you don't have a lawn, you can still make an impact with plants in pots, for example, on your entryway or deck. Want to know more? Xerces offers a lot of wonderful books that you can find at the library or on Amazon. Xerces also offers lots of resources on their website that you can download for free. Check out Xerces' YouTube channel for webinar series and educational programs. Thank you so much for watching this webinar, and I hope you're inspired to learn and do more. Make a change towards supporting the diversity of life that makes our lives possible.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Dianne, very much. I absolutely love the way you show in this presentation the diversity of bees, and it covers so many things. It's beautiful. Let me see. Brandy, do you think we have questions that?
Yes, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. First, we have one: how can a landowner identify keystone plant species for his particular area? That is, which are the most important to plant?
That is a really good question. And actually there is, what I would suggest is, there is a website. I have to recall it right now. So if you go to Douglas Tallamy's website, to Homegrown National Parks, he has on that website, you will find a link for each ecoregion containing the keystone and most important native plants. And that will help you and guide you.
Okay, we have another question. What's a good starter eco-lawn plant mix for Nashville and Middle Tennessee?
Eco-lawn?
Yes, I think they're just saying what would be an eco-friendly plant mix for Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And I think we should just direct them to our seed mixes available through Generate Some Buzz, correct?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if it is a lawn or a pollinator garden that they are asking for, but if you are asking for native plants here, that I would definitely suggest to go to our website and check out our seed mixes. One of my favorite is the conservation mix, because that's a relatively low growing, and it provides a lot of beautiful wildflowers like black-eyed Susan, false sunflower, wild bergamot. That creates a beautiful habitat, and it's not as tall. So I would suggest to check that one out.
Okay. There was a question for Dianne. Is in your presentation, you talk about a pesticide that was applied in a parking lot. And the question was that in Nashville, or do you know where that was?
It was not in Nashville, and I believe it was in Oregon, fairly close to where the Xerces Society has its headquarters. So it was kind of one of those things that they just discovered by circumstance, I guess. It was just, I think it was one of those things that was a realization of what an impact, and they were applying that in particular. I'm not sure which chemical they used, but they were doing it for aphids because people were parking their cars underneath these trees. And so there was a lot of complaints. So that's what initiated the use of the pesticide. So.
Okay, thank you. Also a comment that in Nashville, we do no mow April instead of no mow May. I mean, you could do either or both would be great. And the Cumberland River Compact has a sign up so you can get a sign for your yard to let people know that's what you're doing. So just a comment from one of our viewers. Also, we have a question. Is TEC involved in any lobbying to local or state government towards outlawing or at least controlling the use of pesticides? Monica?
I'm not able to answer that question. Do you maybe know better than I would, Brandy?
Yeah, so we are at the moment, we are not, there's not a particular bill that I know of that has been introduced in the current legislature, but we're definitely, we do lobby when we do support something. And if someone were to introduce such a bill, we would definitely support that.
Support it, yeah.
But at the moment, I don't know of one that has been introduced. The next question is, what should we do about the carpenter bees? We have a lot of them in East Tennessee.
So I know that carpenter bees are a lot of problem for people who has wood decking. It is a very hard decision to make. My suggestion is always to make sure that if you have a garden, leave logs out and leave that plant material, that wood in the garden, so they would find habitat there. So at least you provide habitat for them, because one of the problem is that we remove everything that from our garden, and that means they have nowhere else to go but our deck. So I think it's also for many native bees, bumblebees, but carpenter bees, always to create a part of your garden which is a wild garden, which is like a little bit untidy somewhere in, I would suggest, I live in an HOA, so I always have to focus these things in my backyard. You know, sometimes when the trees die, you don't need to cut it back all to the ground, just leave some dead plant material and logs for them.
Okay. Another question, bees and butterflies are attracted to zinnias and herb like basil. Are they not considered to be beneficial?
So for example, zinnia is not native to this ecoregion, but they are beautiful flowers, and they definitely pollinators love them. So I think Douglas Tolomee suggests in his book that if you can aim to have 70% of native plants in your garden and you manage to reach that, then you are really good at your goal. So I think there are plants that can support our pollinators, but of course we are suggesting to try to find ones that are native to our ecoregion.
So we have another question about legislation, which is, she's asking, is there any legislation to ban the selling of invasives in nurseries or big box stores, or campaigns to pressure educate the stores? Not that I know of. Is anyone else aware of any legislation in Tennessee regarding invasive plants?
Unfortunately, I have not heard anything like that in Tennessee. I hope that other states are showing a good example for us, and we will follow that example, and certain plants will be banned, like color repair are banned in some states in the north. So we hopefully will follow their lead and ban those plants.
I'll just add to that. There's been discussion about that, and have worked with Margie Hunt, or she has, I asked her that question because she's a part of the Native Plant Society here in the Nashville area. And she said, unless you can prove there is an agricultural issue that it interferes with the revenue of the farmer or the industry, that it is very, very difficult to get anything banned. And so all the pivot and Japanese honeysuckle and all those plants that are now just taking over our, basically our highways and our open wooded areas, all that, you know, can't be eradicated, or you can't stop people from buying more of those plants to put in unless you can prove damages. And so I think that's going to be one of those things, is just educating the public and going to your nursery, your local nursery, and asking for these plants, because nurseries are only going to offer what they can make money on. And that's only we can vote with our dollars on that one. So just being aware of what you're buying, I think is really important on the front end.
I agree, Diane. That's a great suggestion. There's a comment, as far as an agricultural change that has vastly impacted pollinators, surely none is as important as no-till agriculture, which drifts on spring winds herbicide onto field margins and adjoining trees. It would take both technical solutions and legal measures to address this. Any other comments that you would like to add to this comment about no-till agriculture?
That I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And there is several ways how we can change our agriculture, and definitely no-till is one important one. Regenerative agriculture is very important as well. Creating hedgerows are a very simple thing that used to be a very common thing in the past. Just hedgerows along the roads or around the fields would create a lot of habitat for pollinators. Native hedgerows, of course, not honeysuckle ones. Yeah, those are very important key. Yes.
Great. We also have a comment that for carpenter bees, one of our viewers puts peppermint or citronella essential oil on her deck and porch, and they leave them alone.
Nice.
Wow.
I will write it down.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, that's a very nice solution. Hopefully, I would definitely try it.
Okay, and I just, we don't have any other questions or comments at this time. So if you have something you would like to ask, please add it now. Or if you think of something after, you can always email us and we'd be happy to follow up with you. I did want to mention about the legislation that we definitely encourage, if you feel strongly about invasives or about banning pesticides, we definitely encourage you to establish a relationship with your state legislators and let them know, even before any legislation comes across their desk, that this is how you feel and why, so that when legislation does come to them, they already have some feedback from their from their constituents, and they already are thinking about this even before any legislation comes up. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to your local legislator, set up a meeting this summer, go and talk to them in person, and develop a relationship with them. We think that's really important.
Yeah, that's really important. I agree. Thank you. Until we get some questions, I wanted to ask a few things because I'm hoping that we have new people who are joining our program, and I would like to ask Dianne some question about how to support native bees in their gardens, how to guide them. So one of the question is, what do you think is the most valuable to support ground nesting bees when you're gardening?
I think leaving the untidy areas and keeping the mulch not so heavily packed on your plants. If you leave the leaves in the fall and then come back in the spring, those leaves also help fertilize the plants, but then it provides that habitat. So it's kind of a win-win for both. And then as later in the spring, as the days get longer and the weather gets warmer, these animals are actually temperature sensitive. So they need a certain amount of warm days and hours of daylight for them to emerge. So don't be too quick to tidy up your garden. Let it relax I know we all get really excited about that. And we see the little plants emerging. Maybe, give the plants a little space, but certainly wait a little longer in the season for the bees and all the other things that have been hibernating to come out. And then of course, leaving a back area of your garden. I live in a HOA too, and I want to maintain a nice relationship with my neighbors. So I keep part of my back garden just a little bit sloppy. So keeping sticks and things like that back there. So just keeping habitat around for them throughout the year. It really, you'll be amazed at how much life you'll see that you didn't even know was there.
Yeah, and I really like that you mentioned HOAs, because I really would like to share that last year I started a little pollinator garden right next to my mailbox. And of course, I went to vacation and come back, and a letter from the HOA was waiting for me, asking me to clean up my front yard. And I think it's very important to realize that a lot of people have never heard about native bees, about importance of native plants, and educating people kindly is really important. And very often the HOA rules were written decades ago, and they are just following the rules. And maybe get involved with your HOA, maybe become a member of your HOA, and lead them and teach them and be kind and explain the importance. And also, I think it's a very good suggestion to have a sign in front, if you have a pollinator garden in the front yard, to explain for the people who walk by what they see. So they are not just saying that, oh, this is a messy garden, but they recognize that maybe the black-eyed Susan finished flowering, but the false sunflower will just start. And that is, you are right now in between of those two beautiful flowers.
Right. Yeah, I agree. The sign, I have an area that's kind of, I have a little edging around it. So it's tidy up till that with the sign. And right now it doesn't look the best because everything, of course, is still just starting to emerge. But every year I always have people comment, as midsummer, it's beautiful and there's a lot going on, and people will ask me questions. So I've been years into this garden. So I think they've come to realize that that's only a temporary situation. It's going to change.
And I have one more thing that I want to mention, that I'm absolutely fascinated about the buzz pollination, and I love to hear about native bees performing buzz pollination and how they are pollinating native plants with that, and how honeybees are not able to perform buzz pollination. And one of my favorite is definitely the bumblebees performing the buzz pollination. There are amazing videos even on YouTube where you can just hear the differences in the sound when they fly or when they do the buzzing, and it is so fascinating. And bumblebees are actually one of, I think we talked about it, Dianne, that they are very effective. They are more effective in pollination often than honeybees. Can you tell something about that?
Right. Well, that is a special service that they perform. And some of these flowers, the interesting thing is that these flowers know, I guess you could say know that they need that particular technique in order. And so they won't release their pollen to just any bee or any insect that lands on it. So the fact that this is kind of, again, that symbiotic relationship, it can come in and their thorax muscles of their wings, they vibrate, and that shakes the pollen loose. So, like I mentioned in the video, mason bees can do that. And 2 mason bees can pollinate as well as 100 honeybees. It's incredible the service they do. So, I think that's when we talked about the unsung heroes of the native bees, that really is probably something that most people aren't aware of. I wasn't aware of that until just the last few years. I suddenly realized, wait a minute, there's so much happening. And I had always thought of honeybees myself. So I'm a guilty party to not really understanding native bees. So yeah, you can actually hear them perform that function. And it's such a sweet little buzzing sound that they make, and then they'll just go from flower to flower. So, we really have to keep the native bees around if we want certain foods. And also I'll mention that chocolate and coffee need pollination. So if you're a fan of
we are definitely dependent on those. Yes,
I really want to keep them around. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I see just one more question. Could you repeat the name of the website with links to the ecoregion keystone species?
So I think if you type in Google homegrown national parks from Douglas Tallamy, that will take you to the website.
Okay, hey, Monica.
Yes.
I think it's actually through the National Wildlife Federation and the Native Plant Finder. It's like a sub-page of the NWF. And it's linked from Douglas Tallamy's website as well, but you can also Google NWF Native Plant Finder, and that's where it is.
Yeah, and I think you choose your ecoregion, and that will lead you to all the plants that are keystone species in that region, right?
Yeah, not all of them. Then one of the things that Douglas Tallamy has said is they are still building that database, and that over the years, we have slowly realized how important these insects are, but they haven't really been studied as much as we would have wished. And so they're still building the website. They're still finding the data, but they have what's available.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gwen.
Okay, we've reached the end of our questions and comments.
Well, then, thank you very much for everyone joining. And if you have any question, please email me, monica@tectn.org, or just Tennessee Environmental Council, which is am I saying it right, Bendy? TEC@tectn.org.
Yes, and we did have Seal Smith just put a link for the National Wildlife Federation in the chat, which apparently has the Keystone ecoregion lists there. So
thank you.
Grab that from the chat real quick. But it will also be included in the recording, which I'm emailing tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Dianne, thank you for the beautiful presentation. It was really fascinating. Brandy and Gwen, thank you very much for joining and answering the question and helping out. We hope that you will all join our Generate and Buzz program. There are several videos and information on our website, so please check those out too, and have a wonderful day.